Imagine this. My family, who never took me seriously, showed up at my door with a trunk full of my sister's things, expecting me to open it as if nothing had changed. But I had a surprise waiting for them. This wasn't the first time they thought they could walk all over me. But this time, I wasn't backing down. Hi, I'm Leah. And for years, I've been the strong one in my family, always helping, always giving. But when I finally said no, things took a turn no one expected. Curious about what happened next? Stick around because the real shocker is yet to come. Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments. And if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way, I can send you a special greeting. Now, let's start the story together. My sister's wedding wasn't supposed to feel like a public roast, but somehow it did. The kind of roast where the laughs were laced with thinly veiled judgment and the air thick with expectations I hadn't asked for. They were all there, my family, dressed in their best, to celebrate Sam, my older sister. But the focus never seemed to shift from her to me. Mom always said, family lifts each other up, but I never quite felt that weight. Instead, I felt like the ground beneath me was slowly crumbling, a small hole opening up as each passing remark, from her, from them, settled deeper. And there I stood, standing on the sidelines, watching as they raised their glasses to Sam's future, and maybe mine, if I ever stopped working long enough to notice. Late spring in Austin, Texas, the trees around the outdoor venue swayed gently in the warm breeze, the string lights above shimmering like stars, suspended in their carefully designed chaos. Pastel dresses, champagne toasts, and the constant hum of music, a scene right out of a picture-perfect wedding. But somehow, it felt more like a set piece I didn't belong in. I stood near the gift table, clutched my purse a little tighter, wondering if I'd be asked to say something next. The family swarmed around Sam. She was the star of the day, no doubt about it, with her perfectly styled hair and sparkling smile that seemed to pull the whole room in. As usual, I was the quiet one, watching from the periphery. "Leah!" Aunt Paula called from across the room, her eyes scanning over the crowd like I was the missing piece. "You okay, sweetheart?" I forced a smile, nodding. "Just enjoying the party." Her face softened, but only for a second before her attention flitted back to the festivities. "Well, you know you can always help out with the seating chart next time. We're just so proud of Sam." She turned back to the bride, oblivious to the quiet sting that followed her words. It was an hour into the reception when Diane, my mom, stood to make her toast. The glass clinked softly against the microphone as she lifted it, and the crowd quieted down. "To Sam, the woman who's finally grown up and found her way," she said, her voice warm but laced with an odd kind of finality. "Hear, hear," came the cheers from the gathered crowd. Someone at the table laughed a little too loudly. Maybe Leah will be next if she ever slows down with all that working. The laughter spread, reaching the corners of the room. A ripple of amusement echoed in the air. It was a joke, sure, but one that carried a bit more weight than I liked. It stung more than I was prepared for, and as I glanced around, I saw Sam's gaze shift to me for a brief moment. She didn't defend me. Instead, she smiled, a little too brightly, and took another sip of her champagne. There was no defense. No one ever defended me in moments like these. I wasn't the one to be defended. I was the one who always picked up the pieces. I was the one who stayed out of the way so others could shine. I forced a smile, something that felt like an apology for being so much of what they needed, but never enough for anything else. The words sat in the back of my throat, but I swallowed them down. I excused myself from the table, walking slowly to the back of the venue. The field beyond stretched out in front of me, dark and still. I stood there for a moment, letting the cold air hit my skin, trying to gather my thoughts. My phone buzzed in my hand, a message from Mom lighting up the screen. "Sweetheart, we were thinking. Sam will stay with you a few months after the honeymoon. You've got space, right?" I stared at the message for a moment. The words hung there in the air, heavy and familiar. I could feel the weight of every yes I'd said to them before, every favor, every request that had come without question, just an expectation. And now, it was happening again. I let the silence settle around me, the sounds of the reception muffled in the distance. My thumb hovered over the keyboard for a second longer, my thoughts clear, steady. The words that came out were simple, the same as every other time I had been asked for help. Of course. If it helped Sam? I pressed send, watching the text disappear into the ether. My eyes were calm, but inside, I was already preparing for the storm that was coming. It wasn't that I didn't want to help, but this time I knew something was different. I couldn't keep letting them take pieces of me without ever asking for a single one back. The phone buzzed again, but I didn't check it. I turned away from the field and headed back toward the celebration. Sam would stay with me, for a while, but I had no idea how long I could keep pretending everything was just fine. Before I ever said no, I'd said yes 100 times, until I forgot what I actually wanted. At first, it wasn't even a question, I just did it. Someone needed something, Sam, Mom, Dad, and I was always the one to give. But after a while, it became a habit. I didn't even think about it anymore. I became the fixer, the solution, the safe harbor. I just never realized how deep it went, how much I'd given until it was too late. Mom's voice echoed in my mind as I sat in the dim light of my apartment. "You're the strong one. You're lucky you can help." It was a phrase that had followed me through my 20s, a mantra of sorts, something that was said when they needed something, but rarely, if ever, heard when I needed help. I remember the first time she said it. I was 22, newly graduated, trying to make my way in the world. Sam was still in college, struggling to find herself, bouncing between jobs, always looking for the next opportunity, but never quite catching up. It was in 2015 when the first real sign appeared. Sam had just gotten a new job, her latest attempt at getting her life together, and everything seemed to be going well for her. That was until she called me in the middle of a Sunday afternoon crying hysterically. Her car had been repossessed. "I can't believe it, Leah. I just need a little help to get back on track." She sobbed over the phone. "It's not my fault. They said they were going to send the notice, but they didn't. I need you." I was in the middle of my own things, work, adjusting to living on my own, dealing with my own responsibilities, but I couldn't ignore her. Sam was my sister, my family. She had always been the one to get into trouble, and I was the one who picked up the pieces. So I co-signed the car loan, thinking it was a small favor. I would help her out, and she'd pay me back when she could, but she didn't, not even once. Within 6 months, Sam stopped making payments, and my pristine credit score started to take the hit. I had to clean up her mess, again, while silently resenting the pattern that was emerging. By 2017, the mortgage crisis hit our family. Dad had been laid off, and the bills were piling up faster than they could keep track. Mom called, panicked, her voice shaking as she explained the situation. "We're short on the mortgage, Leah. You're the only one who can help." Without hesitation, I wired $2,000 to cover it, thinking it was temporary, thinking it would fix things. And for a brief moment, it did. But that moment never lasted. The calls continued, the money kept flowing, but it wasn't enough to make anyone else care. I didn't get a thank you. I didn't get acknowledgement. I just became the safety net, the one who could handle it, who could take care of everything. By 2019, the DUI incident happened. Sam had gotten behind the wheel again, and it wasn't her first time. I remember the cold silence that followed when Mom called me that night. "We can't let this get out, Leah. It'll ruin everything. You're the only one who can fix this." I paid for the lawyer, again, silently resentful of the way my own life was being put on hold while they asked for more. Sam never said thank you. It was just expected, as always, and I kept quiet. I kept quiet because that was what was required of me. I kept quiet because that was the role I had accepted without ever being asked to. But by 2021, something shifted. I started to feel the weight of it all, the endless demands. I had spent my whole life being the strong one, the one who didn't break, the one who made it all work. But I realized that I hadn't asked for any of it. I hadn't asked for this role, this expectation. I hadn't even noticed how much it had been taking from me until I found myself sitting alone in my condo, staring at the walls that I decorated for others, for them, not for me. I hadn't made this space mine. The cushions were arranged for family visits, the shelves carefully curated with books and photos for when they came over. I didn't decorate the way I wanted to. I decorated the way I thought they expected me to. I never let myself breathe in this space. I sat there for hours, surrounded by the silence of my own thoughts. And it hit me then. I was tired. I was tired of being the fixer, the person who could always make things work but never had anything left for herself. I deleted the family calendar from my phone, the one that held every birthday, every family gathering, every obligation. I deleted it without a second thought. Sitting there in that empty space, I realized I had been living my life for others. It wasn't a life I had chosen. It was a life that had been handed to me, piece by everyone who had ever asked me for something. And for the first time, I said no. I picked up my phone and called a realtor. "I'm ready to sell," I said quietly. Quietly. I didn't care if they noticed. I didn't care if they were disappointed. It was time for me to finally take control of my life. I glanced over at the stack of spreadsheets on the counter, the one I kept to track all the family expenses. Sam's car loan, the mortgage payments, the legal fees, Post-it notes with PIN numbers, lists of payments I'd made without a word of thanks. The world's best daughter mug sat on the counter, mocking me. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to be the strong one anymore. Sam didn't ask to move in. She just assumed the door would be open, because it always was. That was the thing with Sam. She didn't need to ask. She never did. She was used to things just falling into place for her. She was used to me saying yes without question, without hesitation. But this time, there would be no automatic yes. It wasn't like I hadn't planned ahead. I had already moved out weeks ago, quietly, without any dramatic goodbyes or speeches. I'd sold my condo. It wasn't much, just a small unit, but it was mine. And yet, for years, it never felt like it truly belonged to me. It was a space I furnished for everyone else. The pictures on the wall, the guest towels in the bathroom, the cushions arranged just so. It was all for them, for when they dropped by, for when they needed me. But no more. Now I was living in a small rental across town. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, and that was all I needed. The walls were bare, the floors creaky, and the air smelled different. It smelled like peace. But peace, I realized, was something my family couldn't understand. They still thought of me as home, the one place they could always turn to, the one constant in their ever-shifting lives. In the meantime, my family, Mom and Dad, had been busy preparing for Sam's move-in. Not into her own apartment or house, of course, but into my old place, the one I had moved out of, the one I had sold without telling them. They thought they had it all figured out. I started getting the texts from Mom. "We'll bring her mattress Saturday. She's so excited to finally have her own space." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. They didn't need me to say yes anymore. It wasn't my problem. The next few days were a blur. I went to the farmer's market that Saturday morning, the sun warming my face as I walked through the aisles, scanning the vibrant produce. Peaches, apples, plump tomatoes, fresh herbs. Everything seemed so alive, so full of possibility. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Again, I ignored it. It was strange, but there was a quiet thrill in that. Each buzz, each notification was like a tug, a reminder of the life I used to lead, a life filled with constant demands. But I wasn't that person anymore. Not today. Today I was someone who could walk through the market, take in the smell of fresh coffee from a nearby stand, feel the soft cotton of a scarf between my fingers, and just breathe. Mom's call came through just as I was picking out a bunch of cilantro. "Leah, there's a man here. He says he lives there. What's going on?" Her voice was frantic, high-pitched, as if the world was ending. I smiled softly, though no one could see me. I was at peace in that moment, and I wasn't going to let her anxiety intrude on it. "Oh, I must have forgotten to tell you, I moved." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her scrambling to make sense of it all. She didn't respond right away. I was starting to think she was just going to hang up when her voice finally broke through. "Leah, you lied to us." I felt a small smile tug at the corner of my lips. "I didn't lie, Mom. You just didn't ask." Her breathing was rapid now. I could imagine her standing there, the phone pressed to her ear, her hands shaking. She wasn't used to this, to me being silent, to me not giving in. "Where are you?" she finally managed to say. "I'm at the farmer's market," I replied, walking past a stall selling handmade candles. The sweet lavender scent filled the air, and for a second, I closed my eyes. The world was moving on without them. You can't just leave. She stammered. "I can," I said softly but firmly, and I did. The conversation ended there. The buzz of the market, the distant chatter of people, the soft click of my shoes against the cobblestones, it all felt like it was happening in a different world, far from the storm that was building on the other side of the phone. I didn't feel the need to explain anymore. I hadn't lied, not really. I just stopped giving them the answers they wanted. I stopped making myself available for their convenience. As I walked through the market, touching the peaches I didn't plan to buy, I felt a kind of quiet strength I hadn't felt in years. The sun warmed my shoulders and the world seemed to expand around me. There was a rhythm to it now, a pulse that was steady and calm. I didn't have to rush. I didn't have to be anywhere but here. Leah Bennett wasn't just the one who always said yes anymore. She wasn't the fixer, the one everyone leaned on. She was someone different now. Someone who could breathe, who could choose to walk away from the old expectations. And for the first time in a long time, I felt alive in a way that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs. They stood at my new door with a trunk full of boxes, like their expectations had GPS. It didn't matter that I had moved across town, changed my address, and left the old place behind. To them, I was still the safe option, the one who would always say yes, who would always let them in. I never realized how heavy their assumptions were until I saw their faces pressed against my peephole, waiting for me to open up like I always had before. The knock came first, a sharp, demanding tap, then another, and another, each sound a reminder that no matter how far I moved, no matter how far I tried to distance myself, they would always find a way to me. I took a slow breath, letting the weight of their arrival settle in. It wasn't the surprise I expected. It wasn't even anger. It was a quiet, cold certainty in my chest. I knew this moment would come. I had known that they would not stop until they were standing at my door again. But I wasn't ready to give in. I wasn't ready to let them in. Not like before. Not this time. I walked quietly to the door, my feet barely making a sound on the old hardwood floors. Through the peephole, I could see them clearly. My parents, Diane and Edward, their faces tight with frustration. Sam standing beside them, arms crossed, eyes narrow, and a pile of luggage stacked in front of them. They had come, not because they had any real business here, but because they had made up their minds that they belonged in my space, that they belonged in my life. I opened the door just a crack, enough to see their faces more clearly. "You found me," I said, the words coming out smoother than I felt. It was the truth. They had found me, just like I knew they would. They always found me, even when I thought I had disappeared. Diane's smile was strained, too wide, like she had prepared herself for some kind of victory. "We tried calling," she said, her voice tight, as though she expected some sort of apology from me. "We didn't think you'd actually move out." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I looked at Sam, who avoided my gaze, her jaw set as if she was waiting for me to cave, for me to let them in. "Leah, you have space." Edward's voice cut through the moment. "We've all been under so much stress, and you know how Sam's been. She needs a place to stay. We didn't think it would be this hard. We're not asking for much, just a little help." His words, as usual, felt like a demand wrapped in a plea. I didn't say anything. Instead, I stepped back, just enough to let them know that I wasn't moving aside. "You're not staying here," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I told you I didn't want this. I didn't ask for this, and I don't want to keep playing this part. Not anymore." Sam looked up from her phone, finally meeting my eyes. "You're being cruel, Leah," she snapped, her voice sharp, angry. "You're my sister. You should be helping me, not shutting me out." I felt the heat of her words, but I didn't let them touch me. Not anymore. The guilt, the responsibility that had weighed me down for years, it wasn't mine to carry anymore. I shook my head. "This isn't about being cruel, Sam. This is about boundaries. This is about me finally having a place that is mine, where I'm not expected to pick up the pieces for everyone else." Edward stepped forward, his face reddening with frustration. "We're not leaving," he said, his voice low but threatening. "We've done too much for you to just walk away like this." I stepped back and picked up my phone from the kitchen counter, the calmness of the moment sending a ripple of quiet through the apartment. The hum of the fridge, the distant sound of traffic outside. It felt like the world was continuing as it should, while they were still trapped in their web of expectations. I dialed the number, my hand steady, my thumb moving over the screen with practiced ease. The phone rang twice before someone answered. 911, what's your emergency?" The dispatcher's voice was calm, distant. "I'd like to report trespassing," I said, my voice unwavering. "They're not on the lease, and I didn't invite them. They're outside my door, and I want them removed." There was a long pause on the other end, and then a soft voice replied, "Okay, ma'am. Stay on the line. We'll send an officer over to assist." I hung up the phone without another word. In that moment, I didn't feel the usual rush of adrenaline that came with standing up to my family. There was no fight, no shouting match. There was only the sound of my steady breath and the silence that settled in the hallway. It was almost like I was watching everything from the outside, knowing that I had finally broken free of the cycle they had put me in. And as I turned back to face them, I knew I was done. Sam's eyes widened as she processed what had just happened. "You're calling the cops on your own family?" Her voice cracked, disbelief written across her face. "No," I said quietly. "I'm calling them on trespassers." Diane's voice cracked as she stepped forward, her eyes narrowing with anger. "You lied to us," she hissed, her words sharp. I met her gaze, my expression calm. "I didn't lie, Mom. You just didn't ask." The silence between us felt suffocating. I didn't need to say anything else. The door stood halfway open, my hand still on the knob, the cool air of the evening rushing in, and I knew that whatever came next, I had finally set the boundary. And this time, I wasn't going to back down. By morning, I wasn't the villain in just one house. I was the villain across Facebook. The notifications came in like a flood, one after another. Texts, missed calls, and the cruelest of all, the post. I hadn't expected them to stoop so low, but then again, I should have known. Diane had always been good at rewriting stories to fit the narrative she wanted. She had turned everything into a performance, and I was the one who had to play the part of the villain. Mom always said, "Never air family business." But she had just made it public for the world to see, complete with emojis, hashtags, and a toddler photo of Sam, looking wide-eyed and innocent. The caption was long, dramatic, and heart-wrenching, painting me as the cold, ungrateful daughter who had turned her back on her family. In her version of the story, Sam was the victim, of course, always the victim, and I was just the villain who refused to care. The post spread quickly. As the day wore on, it went semi-viral. Family members, church friends, old high school acquaintances were all weighing in with their thoughts on my apparent cruelty. The comments piled up, some with thinly veiled judgment, others with outright anger. "Leah, how could you do this to your own sister? You've always been selfish, haven't you? Sam's life is falling apart and you're just going to let her struggle?" The words stung, but I didn't cry. I didn't feel anything close to the guilt they wanted me to feel. Instead, I took a deep breath and opened the folder on my desktop titled "Debt I Didn't Owe." It had taken years to fill this folder, but there it was, proof of every favor I had done, every time I had said yes when I should have said no. I started with the bank transfers, the $2,000 to cover the mortgage in 2017, the legal fees for Sam's DUI, the car loan I had co-signed on, only for Sam to default on it within months. I uploaded the receipts, the screenshots, the invoices, the silent proof of all the times I had been used, all the times I had helped without ever being asked if I was okay. Then I found a text from Sam that I had saved years ago, back when she had accused me of being a boring robot because I wouldn't let her crash at my place for a month. "You're such a robot. Can't you just let me crash for once?" The words rang in my ears like a sharp reminder of the years I had spent being expected to do more than I could ever give. With each post, I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. There was no anger in my tone, no defiance. I didn't need to shout my truth. I didn't need to demand apologies or recognition. I just shared it, plain and simple. The truth didn't need embellishment. It didn't need a dramatic flair. It was just there. The final line of my post read, "I didn't abandon my family, I just stopped volunteering for emotional debt." I sat back for a moment looking at the screen. The world could see what I had done, what I had given. There was no more pretending, no more silence. I turned off my phone. It wasn't because I was afraid of what they would say next. I had seen enough of their judgment. It wasn't because I didn't care about the consequences. I had long stopped caring what they thought of me. It was because I didn't need to hear the ending they would write for me. I had already written my own. The satisfaction of truth, of not having to explain myself anymore, filled me in a way I hadn't expected. There was no fanfare, no applause, no one congratulating me for finally speaking up, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that I could finally breathe, that I didn't need to apologize anymore for existing outside their expectations. The post was up. It would do what it would do, and I didn't have to explain any further. The phone buzzed again, but I didn't look at it. I stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the city below. It was a small, quiet corner of the world, but it was mine. And for the first time, it felt like enough. It wasn't the end of the story. Not yet. But it was the end of the chapter I had been playing in for too long. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. I just felt done. It wasn't the victory I thought I would feel after everything that had happened, the way they had tried to manipulate and control me. It wasn't the relief I imagined I would have when I finally took a stand. It was simply an ending. A quiet, calm ending to a chapter I had never really wanted to be a part of in the first place. Back in 2015, I once told myself, one day I'll walk into a space that's mine, only mine. That day has come, and it wasn't the grand, dramatic moment I had expected. No applause, no fireworks, just the soft hiss of the kettle on the stove and the gentle hum of the fridge in the background. It was evening, the light fading, the city below me beginning to sparkle with life. My new apartment was small, minimalist in its simplicity. The furniture was sparse, just the essentials. A couch, a small table, a bed with no frills. It was a far cry from the carefully curated space I used to live in, the one I decorated with them in mind, not myself. Now, the place was just mine, and it was quiet. The kettle whistled softly from the kitchen, and I stood there for a moment, watching the steam rise, filling the room with the calming scent of chamomile. I didn't check my phone, though it buzzed relentlessly on the counter. Mom, Sam. There were probably dozens of messages by now, all demanding answers, apologies, explanations. I blocked their numbers without a second thought. I walked to the balcony and opened the door, letting the cold air rush in. It wasn't a biting cold, just enough to feel real, to remind me that I was alive. The world outside was still moving on. People walked by on the street below, the sounds of the city filling the silence of my apartment. But in here, in this space, there was peace. A kind of peace I had never known before. As I stepped out onto the balcony, I smiled at the neighbor across the way. He was 2 floors down, walking his dog, a small golden retriever with too much energy for its own good. He waved when he saw me, a casual, friendly wave. I waved back, and for a brief moment it felt more genuine than anything I had experienced in a long time. More genuine than my sister's wedding, more genuine than the years I had spent bending over backward for my family. I went back inside and took a seat at the table, sipping my tea slowly. It was warm, soothing, comforting. The kind of tea that didn't need to be rushed. I wasn't in a hurry anymore. There was no deadline, no expectations. No one was waiting for me to play a part. I turned off the lights one by one. The kitchen light, the hallway light, the lamp by the couch. The soft click of each switch felt like a small victory. There were no family photos on the walls, no forced smiles or happy moments captured for their sake. Just space, just quiet. I looked around at the emptiness, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel lonely. It felt free. I didn't come here to be loved. I came here to stop pretending. I came here to be myself without anyone else's expectations weighing me down. I didn't need to perform anymore. I didn't need to fix anyone. I didn't need to be the one they leaned on when things got hard. The stillness of the apartment felt like a gentle embrace. It wasn't about the material things or the grand gestures anymore. It was about the space I had created for myself, the life I was finally living on my own terms. The fridge hummed softly in the corner, the only sound in the room. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence fill me up. The small, simple sounds of the apartment were the soundtrack to my freedom. I thought about the people who would read my story, the ones who would rewrite it to fit their version, the ones who would never see the full picture, the ones who would never understand why I had done what I did. They could tell their version, but I had already lived mine. Let them rewrite the story. I've already lived it. After everything, I didn't find triumph or anger, just a sense of peace. This small apartment, though not perfect, is the only space I can truly call my own. And sometimes, in life, we must learn to let go, not just of material things, but of the expectations and demands of others, to find peace within ourselves. We can't change others, but we can choose how much we let them affect us. Forgiveness isn't about allowing them to keep hurting us, but freeing ourselves from unnecessary burdens. Even though life can be tough, love always finds its way back when we allow it to grow from within our hearts. If this story touched you, feel free to share your thoughts on what you've learned, and if you want to continue following this journey of finding peace, don't hesitate to follow along for the next stories.